Buried alive. Bolinas. On a summer afternoon in 2023, a 17-year-old boy was at Bolinas Beach in Marin County, California. He was there with others, spending time on a stretch of Northern California coastline that sits north of San Francisco, quiet by the standards of most California beaches, framed by low bluffs and open water. Bolinas is not a tourist destination in the conventional sense. It is a small, isolated community. The beach is narrow and unhurried. On a summer day, it draws locals, families, and younger visitors looking for space away from the more crowded shores to the south. The water at Bolinas can be cold even in July and August. The sand is coarse and dark in places, dense enough to pack. The boy had been digging a hole in the sand deep enough that the project had taken sustained effort. Sandhole digging is a fixture of beach culture, particularly among younger beachgoers. It is treated as harmless. It is rarely flagged as dangerous. Lifeguards at many beaches across the country will warn against holes that go too deep. But the warnings are not universal, and the awareness of the risk is not wide. The hole the boy had dug reached a depth later estimated at approximately 8 feet. That is deep enough for a person to stand inside with only their head above the rim. He was inside the hole when the walls gave way. Sand does not collapse the way a building does. It does not announce itself. Dry sand above a certain depth is subject to pressure from the surrounding material. When a wall fails, it fails fast, and the volume of sand that moves is significant. An 8-foot hole does not produce a small slide. It produces a sudden, complete burial. The sand came in from the sides and from above. Bystanders on the beach saw it happen. What had been a visible space became level ground in the span of seconds. The boy was underneath it. The people around him moved immediately. They began digging with their hands, with whatever they could find. Digging someone out of a collapsed sand hole is not straightforward. The sand that fills the space is loose and unstable. Digging in one area can shift material from another. There's also no way, from the surface, to know exactly where the person is beneath the fill. The effort was urgent and it was sustained, but the sand kept the location uncertain. Marin County Fire Department was called. Responders arrived at the beach and joined the excavation. Professional rescuers faced the same physical challenge that bystanders face in a sand collapse. The instability of the material works against rapid extraction. Moving too aggressively risks further shifts. Moving too slowly means time passing underground. He was extracted from the hole. The details of how long the extraction took were not fully disclosed in public reporting, but the timeline from collapse to recovery was not short. He was transported to a hospital. He did not survive. He was pronounced dead. The cause of death was asphyxiation from sand burial. Sandhole collapses are recorded across the United States and internationally with regularity. Studies published in medical and emergency management journals have documented dozens of deaths over the decades, with the majority of victims being children and teenagers. The sand provides no air. The pressure on the chest prevents breathing even when the burial is incomplete. Several jurisdictions in the United States have moved to prohibit beach holes deeper than knee height, though enforcement is inconsistent and the rule is not universal. The beach at Bolinas did not have posted restrictions on hole depth that day. Lightning kills swimmers. Lorne is a coastal town on the Great Ocean Road in Victoria, Australia. In the height of the Australian summer, its beach draws large crowds. The water is cold by tropical standards but swimmable. The town is small, but during peak season, the foreshore fills with families, tourists, and regular visitors who have been coming to Lorne for years. In late January of 1980, Lorne Beach was busy. The summer holidays were ongoing. The sky over the Victorian coast, as it frequently does, carried weather that could shift faster than beachgoers anticipated. Thunderstorms on the southern Victorian coastline are not rare in summer. The combination of heat inland and cold southern ocean air creates conditions that build quickly. On this day, multiple people were in the water. Swimmers, waders, people standing waist deep in the shallows. The beach scene was ordinary. Nothing about the conditions visible from the sand would have indicated to most people that what was about to happen was seconds away. A lightning bolt struck the water. Seawater conducts electricity. This is not a gradual process. The electrical charge from a lightning strike propagates outward through water, across a significant radius from the point of impact. People in the water at the moment of the strike do not need to be standing at the point of impact to be affected. The conductivity of salt water means the charge travels fast and far. Multiple swimmers were knocked unconscious simultaneously. People in the water went limp. Some were visible from the shore. The response from bystanders on the beach was immediate. People ran into the water. They pulled swimmers toward shore. The scale of what had happened, multiple people incapacitated at once, made the scene chaotic in the first minutes. Lifeguards and emergency services were called. Responders arrived and began assessing and treating multiple casualties at the same time. Some of those pulled from the water were responsive. Some were not. The beach became a mass casualty site in the middle of what had been an ordinary summer afternoon. 2 people could not be revived. Despite the efforts of responders working on multiple patients simultaneously, 2 individuals were pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death for both was electrocution via lightning strike conducted through seawater. The surviving injured were treated on the beach and transported for further medical care. The number of people affected beyond the 2 fatalities reflected how broadly the electrical charge had traveled through the water from the single point of impact. Water does not protect a person from lightning. It does the opposite. Coastal and aquatic safety authorities consistently list swimming during lightning activity as among the highest risk behaviors a person can engage in near open water. The charge does not require a direct strike. Proximity in conductive water is enough. At Lorne Beach on that January day in 1980, 2 people learned that in the most final way possible. Rip current, no return. Panama City Beach sits along the Gulf Coast of Florida in Bay County. It is one of the most visited beach destinations in the United States, drawing millions of visitors each summer. The Gulf water there is warm and clear, and the beach is wide and well developed. For many visitors, particularly those coming from inland states, it is their primary beach experience of the year. The flag system used at Panama City Beach is standardized and color-coded. Green flags indicate calm conditions. Yellow flags indicate moderate hazard. Red flags indicate high hazard, meaning dangerous surf and currents. Double red flags mean the water is closed to swimmers entirely. The double red flag is not a suggestion. Under Florida law, swimming under double red flag conditions is a violation subject to a fine. In June of 2016, double red flags were flying at Panama City Beach. Rip current conditions along that stretch of the Gulf were severe. Rip currents form when water pushed toward shore by waves finds a channel to rush back out. They do not pull swimmers under. They pull swimmers away from shore, fast, in a narrow channel of outward moving water. A rip current can move at speeds that exceed what most people can swim. Fighting directly against one is exhausting and, for many people, unsurvivable. The correct response, swimming parallel to shore until out of the current, is not instinctive and is not widely known among casual beachgoers. People entered the water anyway, despite the flags, despite the posted warnings. The beach was in its peak summer season. Families were on the sand. Children were in the shallows. Some went further. The current took them fast. When people began struggling in the water, others on the beach responded the way people respond. They ran in. Some of those who entered the water to help were caught in the same current that had taken the original victims. What began as individual distress events became a cascading emergency. Multiple people were in the water at the same time, all of them fighting a current that did not stop. The Coast Guard was called. Bay County Sheriff's Office responded. Emergency medical services arrived on the beach. The water was still moving. Responders worked to reach people in the current, while others on shore pulled swimmers who had made it closer in. 6 people were pulled from the water, unresponsive. All 6 were beyond rescue by the time they were reached. Emergency personnel on the beach worked the scene across multiple patients. None of the 6 could be saved. 6 people were pronounced dead. The cause of death for all 6 was drowning. The beach was closed. The event drew significant attention to enforcement of double red flag rules in Florida. Panama City Beach subsequently increased enforcement efforts and public communication around flag warnings. Under Florida law, violating a double red flag order carries a penalty. The law existed before June of 2016. It did not stop 6 people from entering the water on that day. Fatal Shark Surf Contest. Greenmount Beach sits at the southern end of the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. It is a consistent surf break, known for clean right-hand waves that peel along a point, and it draws surfers of all experience levels. In September of 2020, the beach was being used the way it always was. Surfers in the water, others watching from the shore, the lineup visible from the beach. Nick Slater was 46 years old and an experienced surfer. He was not a newcomer to the water at Greenmount. He was in the lineup when the shark attacked. The attack happened without the warning that popular imagination associates with shark encounters. There was no prolonged approach visible from shore. Witnesses in and around the water saw the strike in its immediate aftermath. The attack was severe. Other surfers in the water responded. They moved towards Slater and worked to get him to shore. This is not a passive or easy act. Moving an injured person through open water in the presence of a shark that has just attacked requires people to override fear and move toward the danger. The surfers around Slater did exactly that. He was brought to the beach. Witnesses and bystanders on the sand worked to help while emergency services were called. Queensland Ambulance Service and lifeguards responded. The injuries Slater had sustained in the attack were severe. Responders assessed him on the beach and began working to stabilize him. He could not be stabilized. The injuries from the shark attack were unsurvivable. Nick Slater was pronounced dead at the scene. Greenmount Beach was closed following the attack. Queensland authorities conducted a search for the shark in the waters around the Gold Coast. The species involved was not confirmed in initial public reporting, with the specificity needed to state it here with certainty. Shark fatalities in Australia are documented and tracked by state authorities and national research bodies. Australia consistently records among the highest numbers of fatal shark encounters of any country. Queensland, New South Wales, and Western Australia see the majority of those incidents. The Gold Coast, with its high volume of surfers and warm water, has seen multiple attacks over the decades, though fatal ones remain statistically rare relative to the number of people in the water on any given day. Nick Slater was 46 years old. He was pronounced dead at Greenmount Beach on the Gold Coast in September of 2020. Cliff collapses, Encinitas. Grandview Beach is a narrow strip of sand at the base of tall sandstone bluffs in Encinitas, California, in San Diego County. The bluffs that rise above the beach are visually dramatic. They are also unstable. Coastal sandstone erodes. The cliffs along the Encinitas coastline had experienced collapses before August of 2019. The erosion was documented. The risk was known to municipal authorities, and the city had been engaged in assessments and monitoring of the bluff condition for years. The beach sits directly below those bluffs. There is no buffer between the base of the cliff and the sand where people sit. On a weekday morning in summer, the beach draws a quieter crowd than weekends, but it is not empty. People lay towels at the base of the bluffs to take advantage of the shade and the shelter from wind. On the morning of August 2nd, 2019, 3 women were seated at the base of the bluff at Grandview Beach. Laura Sobel was 34 years old. Ectabot was 40 years old. Anna Tim was 53 years old. A 4th person was in the vicinity, but not in the direct path of what was about to happen. The cliff section above them, approximately 30 feet high, collapsed without warning. There was no audible precursor reported by witnesses. No visible cracking. No dust falling first. The section of bluff came down in a mass. The material, dense compacted sandstone and earth, landed directly on the 3 women. A 4th person nearby was not killed. Witnesses on the beach called emergency services immediately. Encinitas Fire Department and San Diego County Fire responded. When responders reached the scene, the 3 women were beneath the debris. The collapsed material was significant in volume. Access to the victims required moving heavy rubble from an unstable base, with the remaining cliff section above the collapsed site still present. All 3 women were found beneath the debris. All 3 were unresponsive. Responders worked the scene but could not change the outcome. The injuries from the collapse were not survivable. Lara Sobel, Ectabot, and Anna Tim were all pronounced dead. The cause of death was traumatic injury from the cliff collapse. The city of Encinitas faced significant legal scrutiny in the years following the collapse. The question of whether adequate warnings had been posted at the base of the bluffs and whether sufficient action had been taken on documented erosion concerns became the subject of litigation. California coastal authorities and municipalities up and down the coast were prompted to review their own bluff monitoring and public warning systems. Some California beaches now post cliff instability warnings at the base of eroding bluffs. Several beach access points along the Encinitas coastline were modified or restricted in the years following August 2nd, 2019. The section of bluff that fell that morning had been standing when those 3 women sat down beneath it. 30 feet of cliff, no warning. Swept from rocks. The coastline at Depoe Bay, Oregon is not a place for passive observation. The rocks along the central Oregon coast are wet, irregular, and subject to wave surge events that arrive without a consistent pattern. The Pacific Ocean along the Oregon coast is cold year-round. The swells that come in off open water build across thousands of miles of fetch before they reach the shore. When they arrive, they do not announce themselves politely. They detonate against the basalt. Wave surge on a rocky coastline is not the same as standing in surf. A surge event is a volume of water moving over rock at speed, driven by swell energy from below. The water rises, crosses surfaces that were dry seconds before, and retreats. The timing between surges is not fixed. A person can stand on a rock shelf through several surge events, and the pattern they observe will not reliably predict the next one. Larger waves arrive in sets. Sets are irregular. Visitors to the Oregon coast are drawn to the rocks. The views are genuine. The formations along the coast near Depoe Bay, Lincoln City, and Point South have been drawing people for generations. The problem is predictable, and it repeats. People step out onto rocks to take photographs, to watch the waves, to get close to something that looks dramatic. They do not all make it back. In documented incidents along this coastline, victims have been knocked from rock shelves by surge events and carried into water that is cold, moving, and far below the surface from which they fell. Survival in the Oregon coast surf zone, once a person is in the water and away from a shore access point, is not likely. The The water temperature is dangerously low. The current and surge in the impact zone prevents stable swimming. The rocks themselves are a hazard during any rescue attempt. Emergency services responding to ocean entries from rocky shorelines face compounding difficulties. Coast Guard and county rescue teams cannot enter the surf zone in conditions that would endanger rescue personnel. Initial response is visual and remote. If the person in the water is not within reach of a throw bag or accessible shoreline, the options narrow very quickly. The wave comes. The person goes in. The water is 48 degrees. The surge does not stop between the person entering and any potential rescue arrival. That sequence has played out at Depoe Bay and at dozens of similar locations along the Oregon coast, and it has produced documented fatalities that span the full recorded history of that coastline. These are not freak events. They are predictable outcomes of a known hazard in a location that draws visitors who underestimate what they are standing next to. The Oregon Parks and Recreation Department maintains warning signage at multiple coastal access points. The signs exist because the pattern exists. The deaths continue regardless. Parasail cable snap, Panama City Beach, in the summer of 2013 was running at full capacity. The beach draws millions of visitors across the summer season, and the commercial operations along the waterfront reflect that volume. Parasailing is among the most popular water-based tourist activities offered along the Gulf Coast. Operators run multiple flights per hour during peak conditions. The activity looks controlled and the altitude feels thrilling but contained. Most trips end without incident. On July 1, 2013, Alexis Fairchild and Sydney Good were both 17 years old. They were on vacation and they booked a parasailing excursion through a commercial operator called Aquatic Adventures. The setup was standard. A boat pulls a tow line, the tow line pulls the parasail lifts passengers into the air above the Gulf. The passengers ride in a harness beneath the canopy, connected to the boat below by the tow cable. The boat moved out into the Gulf. The line went taut. The girls went up. At altitude, conditions changed. A wind gust struck. The tow line snapped. Once the tow line separates, there is no mechanism to control where the parasail goes. The canopy and everything attached to it becomes subject to wind. The wind on that day carried Alexis Fairchild and Sydney Good away from the water and across the beach. They were traveling at the mercy of the gust, in a parasail with no connection to the boat below, toward the buildings that line the beachfront at Panama City Beach. They hit the Summerwind condominium complex. The impact was witnessed by people on the beach below and on the property. Both girls sustained catastrophic injuries in the collision with the structure and a subsequent fall into a parking lot. Emergency services responded and both were rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Though both girls faced a long, difficult recovery from traumatic brain and spinal injuries, they miraculously survived the impact. The cause of their near-fatal injuries was the collision following the tow line failure on July 1, 2013. The investigation into the accident focused on the condition of the tow line and the operating practices of Aquatic Adventures. The broader regulatory picture that emerged was significant. At the time of the accident, parasailing operations in the United States were subject to minimal federal oversight. There was no federal licensing requirement for parasailing operators. There was no mandatory equipment inspection standard enforced at the federal level. Florida became the first state in the country to enact specific parasailing safety regulations, doing so in 2014, 1 year after the severe injuries that occurred in that summer season at Panama City Beach. Including this incident, the regulations addressed operator certification, equipment standards, and wind conditions under which operations must cease. Both girls faced years of intensive rehabilitation, but they survived, drowning at Hanakapi'ai. There is a sign at the start of the Kalalau Trail on the north shore of Kauai, Hawaii. It is hand-painted and has been maintained for years by park staff and locals. The sign lists the number of people who have drowned at Hanakapi'ai Beach. The count has exceeded 80. It is updated when new deaths occur. Hanakapi'ai Beach is 2 miles in from the trailhead, accessible only on foot along the Napali Coast State Wilderness Park. There is no road. There is no parking lot at the beach. There are no lifeguards. There is no emergency vehicle access. If something goes wrong at Hanakapi'ai, the response involves a helicopter because nothing else can get there in time. The beach itself is visually striking in a way that is difficult to overstate. The Napali coastline rises in green ridgelines above the sand. The water is clear. In the summer months, the beach has actual sand and it looks swimmable. That appearance is misleading. The ocean at Hanakapi'ai does not behave the way it looks. The swells that reach the Napali coast have crossed open Pacific water. The surge events they produce are sudden and powerful. In the winter months, the beach disappears entirely. The waves consume it. The sand washes out to sea and returns in summer, which means means the beach exists on the sufferance of the ocean, not the other way around. The primary hazard is wave surge at the shoreline. People stand at the water's edge. The water looks calm. Then a set arrives from the open ocean and the surge sweeps across the sand faster than a person can react. People who are at the water's edge when a surge event hits are taken into the water immediately. The force and volume involved is not something that can be swum against. The water pulls outward, and the rocks and the shore break make return to the beach extremely difficult. This sequence is not hypothetical. It is documented. It is why the sign exists. The sign is not a piece of folk art. It is an accurate count. When someone enters the water at Hanakapi'ai in a surge event, the response timeline is defined by the geography. The Kauai Fire Department has conducted ocean rescues at this location. Helicopter response to the Nepali coast is the standard mechanism because there is no other. The time between an incident occurring and rescue assets arriving is not short. The water at Hanakapi'ai is not forgiving of the gap. Hikers who reach Hanakapi'ai after the 2-mile trail often feel that arriving at the beach is itself an accomplishment, and the beach rewards the effort visually in every way. The sign at the trailhead is 2 miles back. By the time people reach the water, some have forgotten what it said, or have decided that the warning applies to other people, to less careful people, to people who do not know how to read the ocean. The ocean at Hanakapi'ai does not grade on those distinctions. It has taken swimmers and waders and people who were simply standing at the waterline looking at the view. It has done this more than 80 times in the documented count on that sign. The actual number, including incidents before the sign was maintained, is not known. The Kauai Fire Department continues to respond to incidents at Hanakapi'ai. The sign continues to be updated. Incident at Chappaquiddick. Chappaquiddick Island sits just off the eastern edge of Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, connected by a small ferry. In the summer of 1969, it was, like much of the vineyard, a destination for people with the means and connections to reach it. It was quiet, private, and largely removed from the mainland. On the evening of July 18, 1969, a private gathering took place on Chappaquiddick. The event was attended by a group of young women who had worked as campaign staffers for Robert F. Kennedy, and by several men including Senator Edward M. Kennedy of Massachusetts. The gathering was held at a rented cottage on the island. Mary Jo Kopechne was 28 years old. She had worked on Robert Kennedy's presidential campaign before his assassination the previous year, and was among the former staffers at the gathering that evening. Late in the evening, she left the cottage with Senator Kennedy, who was driving a 1967 Oldsmobile Delmont 88. Kennedy later stated he was driving toward the ferry. The route he took led instead toward Dyke Bridge, a narrow wooden structure with no guardrails, crossing from the paved road onto a dirt lane that led to a beach area called Cape Pogue. Dyke Bridge was unlit. The road approaching it was unpaved. Kennedy later estimated his speed at approximately 20 miles per hour when the car went off the bridge. The car went off the side of the bridge and landed upside down in Poucha Pond, the tidal channel beneath the structure. Kennedy surfaced. He later stated he made repeated attempts to reach Kopechne inside the submerged vehicle before swimming to shore, exhausted. He did not call the authorities that night. He did not alert emergency services. He walked back toward the cottage and later made his way back to Edgartown. He spoke with several acquaintances before making any report. He did not report the accident to authorities for approximately 10 hours after it occurred. The car remained upside down in Poucha Pond overnight. The following morning, 2 fishermen spotted the submerged vehicle in the water. They flagged down a deputy sheriff. Diver John Farrar, a member of the Edgartown Fire Department, was called to the scene. He entered Poucha Pond and located the vehicle. Mary Jo Kopechne was inside the car. In the rear footwell, she was dead. Farrar later testified at the official inquest into her death. His testimony included the assessment that based on her position in the vehicle and the air pocket that would have formed in that area as the car filled with water, she had likely survived for a period of time after the car went off the bridge. He testified that, in his professional opinion, had he been called to the scene that night, he believed he could have saved her. That call was never made on the night of July 18th. Mary Jo Kopechne was pronounced dead. The cause of death was drowning. She was 28 years old. Senator Kennedy pleaded guilty to leaving the scene of an accident after causing personal injury. He received a 2-month suspended sentence. No additional criminal charges were filed. He delivered a nationally televised address about the incident and retained his Senate seat. He served in the United States Senate until his death in 2009. Tsunami strikes Thailand. On the morning of December 26th, 2004, the beaches of southern Thailand were full. It was peak tourist season on the Andaman coast. Khao Lak, Phuket, Phi Phi Island, and the surrounding areas were at capacity with international visitors from Europe, Australia, the United States, Scandinavia, and across Asia. Christmas had been the day before. Many hotels were fully booked. The sand at Khao Lak was occupied with beach chairs, umbrellas, and the ordinary infrastructure of a vacation morning. At 6:58 a.m., local Thailand time, a magnitude 9.1 to 9.3 undersea earthquake ruptured along a fault off the northern coast of Sumatra, Indonesia. It was one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. The rupture displaced an enormous volume of ocean water and generated a tsunami that propagated outward in all directions across the Indian Ocean. There was no Indian Ocean tsunami warning system in 2004. The Pacific Ocean had one. The Indian Ocean did not. The first indication visible from the beaches of Thailand came from the sea itself. The water began to recede. It pulled back from shore far further and far faster than a normal tidal movement, exposing wide stretches of seabed that are never visible under ordinary conditions. Fish were stranded on the exposed sand. Boats in the shallows listed and settled on the bottom. The sea went back a distance that beachgoers had never seen before. People walked out onto the exposed seabed. They photographed the fish. Some recognized what they were seeing. Most did not. The retreat of the sea before a tsunami is a warning sign that is known to scientists and to populations in tsunami experience regions. It is not widely known among tourists on a vacation morning. The window between the sea receding and the wave arriving was measured in minutes. The wave reached Khao Lak before it reached Phuket. At Khao Lak, the waves reached heights estimated at up to 10 meters in some areas, approximately 33 feet. The destruction was not gradual. The water hit the beach and kept moving. It crossed the sand and went through buildings. Hotels along the beachfront at Khao Lak were destroyed. The visitor center for Khao Lak Lam Ru National Park was destroyed. The waterline moved hundreds of meters inland in some locations. Multiple waves arrived in succession. The interval between them was enough that some people had moved toward the water after the first wave receded and were struck by the second. Rescue was not possible in the immediate aftermath. There were no rescue services scaled for what had happened. Local hospitals were overwhelmed within the first hour. International emergency response took days to mobilize fully. The identification of victims at Khao Lak and across the broader Thai impact zone took weeks and months. Some missing persons cases from the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami were not closed for years. The victims included residents, local workers, fishing families, and international tourists from dozens of countries. Children were among the dead. In Thailand alone, more than 8,000 people were confirmed dead. The broader Indian Ocean tsunami killed over 227,000 people across 14 countries, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded human history. The cause of death for the victims in Thailand was drowning and traumatic injury from the tsunami wave impact on December 26, 2004. In 2006, the Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning System was established. It did not exist on the morning the sea pulled back from the beaches of Khao Lak. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.